Hi, welcome to the Shepherd's Rest Doc Talk. This is episode 196B.
I'm Gamliel Sajili.
Yes, hello. This is the Chronicles of the Apostles. We're going through Acts, and now we are on Acts 23. We finally got through 21 and 22. That was so long. But it's important to go through it kind of slow. Last week, remember, Paul was mobbed, basically.
Yes.
In the temple courts. He was pushed out, and then he was snatched up by the Roman commander because he saw this man who was being basically beaten. And anyway, there was going to be a riot. And they didn't want any riots because that looks bad on them.
Right.
All right, that's the only reason. We need to clear that up. It wasn't because they cared about this man. It's because it looks bad on them.
And how often does that still happen? People are really concerned. What are they going to say about me because you did this?
Right. So he picked him up, started interviewing him, come to find out he's a Roman citizen. Right. So now he's going to take him before the Sanhedrin and try to get to the bottom of it. That's where we're picking up in 23. Paul is before the Sanhedrin. It says in 23:1, and Paul, looking intently at the council, said, "Men, brothers, I have lived in all good conscience before Elohim until this day." So I want to just take a second to talk about the Sanhedrin. So we know that the Sanhedrin is made up of 70 elders, I guess you would say. And we're going to see in a little bit how they're split between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Okay. And when we get there, we're going to talk about the difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, but not right now. Okay. First, I want to talk about, do you remember back in Acts chapter 7 when we talked about Stephen?
Yes.
And how Paul was present? He was part of the Sanhedrin.
Yes.
So he is in very familiar territory. He knows how this works, and he still knows a lot of the players. It hasn't been that long that he was removed from that.
He knows their playbook too.
Yes, so I wanted to talk about two of those players for just a second.
Okay.
So one of them was Yochanan Ben Zaki. He was a Pharisee, all right, and Paul was a Pharisee, and that's going to become very important here in a few minutes. So he was a senior member, and he was very fair, all right. That is what the Talmud says about him. He also had many disciples. He was friends with Nicodemus.
Okay.
All right. So he was around in Yeshua's time. And he followed Yeshua's teachings. When you look at the different historical documents that talk about some of his sayings and his parables, they're just like Yeshua's. Yeah, so it's believed that he may have been a believer and a follower.
So he and Nicodemus could have been like,
had
burning at midnight oil.
That's right. Now, all this is going to come into play as we move through chapter 23. He also predicted the temple would be destroyed by fire by using Zechariah 11:1, which I thought, wait a minute, what? I don't remember that. So I went and looked up Zechariah 11:1, and we're going to read it.
Okay.
All right, so Zechariah 11:1 says, "Open your doors, O Lebanon, and let fire devour your cedars. Howl, O Cyprus, for the cedar has fallen, because the mighty are ravaged. Howl, O oaks of Bashan, for the dense forest has come down." And I started thinking about that. I started researching it a little more. And it's believed that the reason that's referring to the temple is because that's where Solomon got the wood to use for the temple. So it's kind of a coded message from the Lord. You know, open your doors. And at this time, the doors of the temple are opening and no one can explain it.
Right.
And he has been known to rebuke the temple doors and say, temple, why are you opening your doors wide? I know about you. I'm trying to do this off the top of my head. I didn't write it down. I know about you.
Sounds like he might, if temple, why are you opening it? Almost like he's kind of referring back to Zechariah.
Yes. So he was always predicting, according to Zechariah 11:1. Well, he didn't say 11:1, but according to the prophet Zechariah, the temple will be devoured by fire, which I thought was really interesting because, and then it goes on to say all these other places, Bashan and the oaks and different areas within Israel, which I thought was interesting because if you remember back when we did the prophets, Solomon did not construct the temple on the Temple Mount. It was constructed all over Israel, and then it was brought and assembled. Actually, it wasn't even assembled on the Temple Mount. It was just brought in pieces, kind of like what they're doing now. They're
building different
parts, and then it's going to be brought in, because he didn't want any hammers to be heard on top of the Temple Mount, because it was the holy place.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting that it mentions all these different types of wood from different areas.
And like that, Solomon hired those people to build it.
Yes.
So they brought their own materials.
They're all
from
invested
where they
in
lived.
it.
Right.
Yes. I mean, all these different places that is mentioned is invested into the temple.
Yeah.
But we're like, oh, this is going to happen over here, and it could just be one event. So I thought, oh, that was really neat.
So
I just wanted to share that with you. All right, so the other player is Simon Ben Gamliel, or Shimon, Simon, however you want to say it. He was the son of Paul's esteemed teacher.
I was just going to say, that's
Gamliel.
his son. Okay.
All right, and he was the president over the Sanhedrin, which made him the arch rival to the high priest, because the high priest was Sadducee. And we're really going to talk about the differences between the Pharisees and the Sadducees in just a minute.
I didn't know that. I always thought that the Sanhedrin was heavily Sadducee, but I guess it had two, like Parliament or like, what am I trying to say? House, the House and Senate, like that.
Well, look, okay, so let's just go to 23:6. It says, now Paul, perceiving that one part were Sadducee and the other Pharisees.
Okay, so they did work together.
Half and half. I mean, it was basically equally divided.
Right.
And that comes into play as to why he proceeds like he does. But first we're going to talk about, I just want to talk about Simon Ben Gamliel for a second, because I thought he was kind of a neat guy. So he was the son of Paul's esteemed teacher, president over the Sanhedrin, arch rival to the high priest, and he was famous for athletics.
Oh, that's funny.
So he was always doing athletic stunts. It was saying that when he would bow, that he would touch the ground with 2 fingers and then be able to come right back up. And when he would entertain at the water libation, with torches and like twirling torches and doing different athletic stuff. Yeah, I just thought that was just really kind of cool, because he was into that, and he was part of. We just think of them as dressed very solemn, right? And they're very thin, and they're just very holy and set apart. And here you got this guy and he had a good sense of humor too, because here is one of his quotes is, all my days I've spent among the sages, I have not found anything better than silence. Study is not the chief thing, but doing. And whoever talks too much causes sin. And I thought, that can be true, because when we're busying ourselves with talking about the word, then we're talking about the word.
Right.
But when we're just talking just to talk, and we just talk and talk and talk and talk to anyone that'll listen, eventually we're going to start talking about people, and we're going to start talking about things we shouldn't talk about. Yeah. And, so he was kind of wise. One more thing I want to say about him is eventually the Sanhedrin became more and more influenced by the Sadducees and became predominantly Sadducean, and he eventually sided with the Zealots, because you had the Pharisees who sympathized with the Zealots. They didn't support them, but they kind of sympathized with, I understand why you're so mad. And you had the Sadducees that sympathized with Rome. All right, they were always trying to keep Rome happy. Yes. All right, so 23:1, we've already read it, but you see Paul say, men, brothers, I have lived in a good conscience before Elohim until this day. That is basically him just saying, I have been Torah observant until this day. I'm a good Jew. That's what he's saying. I am a good Jew who has done what they were supposed to do. Gotcha. All right, that's all I have about that. And then 2 through 5, let's just read it. It says, and the high priest Ananias, remember we talked about him last week, and the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by to strike him in the mouth. Then Paul said to him, Elohim is going to strike you, whitewashed wall. And do you sit judging me according to the Torah? And do you command me to be struck contrary to the Torah? And those who stood... All right, well, let's stop right there. So there is so much debate about these 2 verses that some scholars want 23 taken out of the Bible.
Cool.
Yes.
That's serious.
Well, because of the way he addressed the high priest. Because in 3 it says, in 4, It says, and those who stood by said, do you revile the high priest of Elohim? And Paul said, I did not know, brothers, that this was the high priest. For it has been written, you shall not speak evil of the ruler of your people. So I started thinking about that, and I thought, okay, I've listened to 2 completely different commentaries on this. One of them says he wasn't dressed in his priestly vestment. The high priest changes constantly. He didn't know that that's who he was speaking to.
Right, and at that time they were changing all the time.
Yes, that is true. The other commentary said there's no way, because he was brought to them in an official court setting where the high priest is definitely distinct from everybody else, and Paul would know that because he was part of that Sanhedrin.
Right.
So you have one camp that says no, he just didn't know, and he's quoting scripture saying, look, if I would have known.
Right.
You have the other camp that says this is Paul being Paul, and he's using sarcasm as in, well, I know that Exodus says that I shouldn't speak to God's rulers like that, proving that he doesn't
see him as the ruler.
See him as a legitimate ruler over Israel.
And could
it
it maybe go both too? Because
Yeah.
I mean, Rome put him there. He might not be legitimate.
He's not.
I mean, because Rome put him there, so that would be accurate. But then it could also be that he didn't know who it was because he wasn't legitimate. So why would they have it? It can't be you.
I just thought I would bring that up because I had no idea until I studied it this week that scholars actually want that out.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I have no idea about that.
Okay, now we are going to discuss the difference between a Pharisee and a Sadducee.
Okay.
All right, because that is really important coming into play. All right, so I wrote a few things down here. All right, so a Pharisee basically believed in the existence of an undying soul. All right. Reward and punishment in the afterlife, hereafter, and the resurrection. The Sadducees didn't believe in any of this. All right, so they didn't believe in the undying soul. They believe that your body's died with your soul. If that's the case, then the rest are null and void because you're not going to believe in a reward system afterward or punishment, and you're not going to believe in a resurrection because your soul's dead.
Right.
All right. So, but I want to tell you about the Sadducees because I did not know this, like where they came from, how they started.
Okay.
So the Sadducees were the chief priests at the time, all right? And they were an aristocratic, elite system, basically, of families, and they were slaves to Rome, pretty much. All right.
Hence why they supported Rome.
Yes. And I say slaves to them because they really had, the Sadducees at the time really had no choice in any matter because on the one hand, they had to do what Rome said.
Right.
And then on the other hand, the Pharisees were the larger and the majority. So they had to go along with the Pharisees also.
Right.
So they were kind of caught in the middle of this. Yes. They were having to appease both sides. So they really didn't stand for much.
Right.
Except let's make as much money as we can. And I thought, of course they thought that way because there's nothing after this life.
So
what does it matter how we act?
Spend it now and behave whatever.
Yes.
Enjoy now.
So here is where the Sadducees come from.
Okay.
All right. So during the days of Alexander the Great, there was a great man called Antigonus of Soka.
Okay.
That's his name. Antigonus, maybe not antagonist, but Antigonus of Soka.
He might be an antagonist.
He was the last of the men of the great assembly, and he taught his disciples, do not be like servants who serve their master expecting a reward. Be like servants who serve their master not expecting a reward. And there was a man, his name was Zadok, and he was one of his disciples. Zadok and Boethus, they misunderstood and they concluded that there's no afterlife, no rewards, and no resurrection from that particular teaching. Yes. I mean, you want to talk about, I know that us coming out of Christian theologies can think of all kinds of laws and things that we believed growing up because of one saying that Paul said.
Right.
Taken out of context.
Yes, that no one ever went to go see what it really meant.
Exactly. So I thought, how interesting.
It's the same thing. Yeah.
That's where the Sadducees, their entire thing comes from. Now, the Sadducees comes from the word Zadok, And they believed that they were from the priestly line of Zadok, when really they started right here with this disciple of this great man in the time of Alexander the Great. So that was what, 300 BC? I mean, it was before Yeshua.
Right, yes, absolutely. I can't tell you the year, but absolutely
So
I can tell you before
300
Yeshua.
BY.
Before Yeshua.
Yes. Yes. And like I said before, the Pharisees, they were sympathizers with the Zealots. The Sadducees, sympathizers with Rome. So they were constantly at odds with each other. Now,
Yet having to work together.
Yes.
There's a challenge.
Now, with all of that in mind, let's read 6. It says, "Now Paul perceived that one part was Sadducees and the other Pharisees, and he cried out in the council, 'Men, brothers, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. I am being judged concerning the expectation and resurrection of the dead.'" He just lit a fire.
Oh, yeah, he did.
He took all the heat off of himself and just lit a fire and stood back, and because every Pharisee came to his defense and said, we don't see anything
right
that this man has done wrong.
He's spoken truth.
That's right. And so they wanted to let him go. They said, "This is ridiculous. It's a kangaroo court." I'm just adding that, but it really was. Now, 7 through 9 is just Luke telling the difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees.
Okay.
So we don't need to go into that. And then 12 is the plot to kill Paul. So it says, "And when it became day, some of the Yehudim made a conspiracy and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul." Now, Paul's already been taken back by the commander.
I don't know how many people died of starvation waiting for Paul to...
Yeah, because guess what? He doesn't die here.
Yeah.
And it's supposed that they just found some priest to get them out of their oath.
Gotcha. They did this really close to Yom Kippur.
Yeah, right. Sorry for
Worst
the oath
case,
that
it's
we've
only 10
taken.
days.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is Shavuot, so they still have a long way to go before, for that. But I want to read in 11. It says, "And on the following night, the master stood by him and said, 'Take courage, Paul, for as you have witnessed for me in Jerusalem, so you have to bear witness at Rome too.'" And I thought, how interesting is that? So Yeshua is like, of course you're going to go to the nations, and he did that already. But you're going to witness before the authorities in Jerusalem and in Rome. And where are the two places, central places for religion under God?
Oh, yeah.
You have Jerusalem and Rome.
Yeah.
That's where the Catholic Church resides, and where all Christianity,
And Paul was a citizen of both.
Yeah, he was.
So, yeah.
And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, seriously, Rome is going to have to hear because he just showed up in Jerusalem? I mean, he didn't do anything.
Right.
And that is what you're going to see throughout the rest of this.
Even more of a testimony why it had to be orchestrated by the Lord.
That's right. That's what I was going to say. Oh. So the ones making this vow, there were 40 of them. So basically what they said is this. All right, listen, Ananias, you say, "Hey, I want to speak to Paul again, and we're gonna redo this whole trial thing." And on his way down, the 40 are going to ambush him and kill him. So he's never going to make it there. Okay, so that's the plot. Well, Paul's sister hears about it. She lives in Jerusalem, and her son, who evidently has some kind of connection to the Zealots. Okay, because these are the Zealots that are saying, "Hey, we've done this before. We know how this works." They're the ones that approach Ananias and say, "Let's do this." All right, it's the Zealots, not the Sanhedrin. These are the Zealots remember, the Zealots are the ones that came in and killed Jonathan, and they're the ones that do all the dirty work. Right. Something needs to be done. Also, I want to say
weapon of the party.
That it's believed that it's the Zealots that are so mad at Paul, because while they have similar beliefs, their way of going about it is complete opposites. Okay. They don't like Paul because Paul is teaching people to submit to authority, to turn the other cheek.
Right.
Just the same reason why they didn't like Yeshua. I mean, we see what Judas did to Yeshua when he didn't do it his way.
Right.
That's how committed the Zealots were.
Well, and again, if to stir them having to call for Messiah to return, those aren't things that are creating chaos, or not chaos, but attention to make people call out.
Right. It's amazing what zeal without knowledge can do. Hence their name Zealot. Because they're zealous. Yes. For the wrong reasons.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So the plot is foiled because his nephew comes to Paul. So Paul's nephew comes to him and says, look, I've heard that this is what's going to happen. He sends him to the commander and says, hey, this is you need to listen to this boy. The commander says, don't tell anybody. And he sends him to Caesarea, I believe.
Okay.
All right. He's sending him up to Felix. Sending him to the governor. We're going to see that next week. We're not going to talk about it this week.
Pilate's house.
Yes. But I do want to say two more things. Here in 26, it says Claudius Lysias, this is who's sending the letter and sending Paul, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man, having been seized by the Yehudim, first it was mob rule. There was no seizing. He wasn't arrested, so he's just kind of appeasing with his words. And about to be killed by them, I rescued, having come with the body of soldiers, having learned that he was a Roman. It wasn't until later that he learned he was a Roman.
Right.
So he's kind of making it sound like I rescued him because he's a citizen.
Right.
He's almost doing Paul a favor.
He's doing a favor for him too, because the ramifications that would fall on him for doing that to a citizen.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He's covering his...
And then he just goes on to tell all the way to 30 of what happened to Paul and said, listen, I have sent the accusers and Paul to you so you can decide what to do. And then I'll skip down to 35. He says, I shall hear you when your accusers arrive also. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's palace. So that is chapter 23. We'll stop right there. And we'll pick up in 24 next week when he stands before Felix and his accusers, and we'll see what happens there.
Yeah. At least he was on the beach. Maybe through the bars he could see it.
Yes, it's like the beach air. Yeah, the waves are very soothing. I love going to the beach and just sitting and listening.
I don't think I'm going to be in a dungeon in the beach, but just saying.
Well, Herod's palace is pretty nice.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of a dungeon he was in, because he is a Roman citizen.
That's true.
Because if something happens to him and it gets back... they'd be in big trouble.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress. So thank you so much for joining us this week, and we will see you next time.
Shalom.